Hello everyone, and welcome back to Morph of Dread. I imagine some of you are winding down for the night, while others might just be settling in after a long day. No matter where you are or what time it is, I'm thrilled to have you with me. If you enjoy the atmosphere here, please consider liking and subscribing. It helps me bring you more stories. Now, let's get you settled, relax your mind, and let's dive into tonight's story. People always ask what the worst part of my job is. They expect me to say the smell, or the blood, or finding pieces of someone in places you wouldn't think to look. But honestly, the worst part is going back. Not to crime scene cleaning in general, I mean going back to the same address. Most people don't realize how rare that actually is. In 6 years doing biohazard remediation, I've returned to the same location maybe 4 times total. Twice to an apartment building with different units, once to a nursing home. Normal stuff. Explainable. But 2247 Rothwell Street has called me back 7 times in 3 months, and I still don't have an explanation that makes sense. The first time was mid-January. Standard job tickets came through around 8 in the morning, unattended death, natural causes, property manager requesting immediate service. I grabbed my gear from the van and pulled up to a narrow 2-story colonial in one of those in-between neighborhoods. Not wealthy, not poor. Just quite. Beige siding, black shutters, a concrete porch with 2 steps. The kind of house you drive past without noticing. The property manager met me outside, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain. She handed me the keys and explained that the owner, a man named Gerald Pritchard, 73, had died in his sleep in the upstairs bedroom. The landlord found him after neighbors reported mail piling up. She seemed uncomfortable but professional, asked how long I'd need, and told me to lock up when I finished. Standard interaction. Nothing unusual. I've been doing this work since I was 26, started right after my EMT certification lapsed, and I realized I liked the cleaning part of emergency response more than the medical part. Got my certifications in biohazard remediation, blood-borne pathogen handling, and odor removal. It pays better than people think, and you work alone, which suits me fine. The job is straightforward if you follow protocol. Assess the scene, document everything, seal the area, remove contaminated materials, disinfect, deodorize, and restore. Most jobs take 4 to 8 hours depending on severity. Gerald Pritchard's bedroom took me 5 hours. He'd been dead for approximately 6 days in a house with the heat set to 74 degrees, which meant decomposition had progressed considerably. The mattress, box spring, carpet, and pad all had to go. I stripped the room down to the subfloor, treated everything with enzyme cleaner and medical-grade disinfectant, then sealed the wood with an odor-blocking primer. I replaced the carpet myself. Most remediation techs don't, but I learned young that controlling the whole job means better results and fewer complaints. The house itself was clean. Not obsessively so, but organized. Dated furniture, beige walls, photos of people I assumed were family. Gerald had lived alone but clearly took care of the place. The air inside felt still, almost preserved, like spaces get when the same person inhabits them for decades. I worked with my usual routine, AM radio playing classic rock, checking my phone between stages of the cleaning process. The bedroom window faced a massive oak tree that filtered the winter sunlight into dim, shifting patterns. Pleasant enough. By 4 in the afternoon, I'd finished, loaded my van with 6 contractor bags of contaminated material, and locked the front door behind me. I didn't think about 2247 Rothwell Street again until my dispatcher called 3 weeks later with another ticket for the same address. That got my attention. I asked Lisa what the situation was, and she paused before answering, Always a bad sign. Different deceased, she told me. Fall down the stairs. A family member found the body. I asked if someone had moved in already, and she said yes. Gerald Pritchard's daughter had been staying there while settling the estate. Now she was dead too. I am 46 years old. Name was Caroline Marsh. When I pulled up that second time in early February, I sat in my van for a minute before getting out. The house looked exactly the same. Same beige siding, same black shutters, same concrete porch. A few more icicles hanging from the gutters maybe. The property manager wasn't there this time. Police had released the scene, and I had the lockbox code. I grabbed my assessment kit and went inside. Caroline Marsh had fallen from the top of the stairs and landed at the bottom, her neck broken on impact according to the police report attached to my work order. The blood spatter pattern on the wall indicated she'd hit hard, probably tumbled rather than simply fell. Most of my work focused on the bottom 3 steps and the adjacent hardwood floor. Blood had pooled significantly and soaked into the wood grain. I ended up replacing a section of 2 boards entirely, something I noted in my documentation with photos. What I also noted but didn't photograph was the smell. Not decomposed this time, Caroline had been found within hours. But the house had a smell underneath the blood and cleaning agents. Something organic and faintly sweet, like plant rot or old water. I checked under the stairs for leaks and found nothing. Checked the basement access in the kitchen, found it locked. The smell persisted throughout my 6-hour shift, subtle but present. I mentioned it to the property manager when she called to confirm completion and suggested they check the plumbing. She said she'd send someone. 3 weeks after that, I got the 3rd call. Same house. Different person. This time a prospective buyer who'd been touring the property alone had suffered what the preliminary report called a cardiac event in the upstairs bathroom. Died on the tile floor. A 61-year-old man, apparently healthy, just collapsed. The bathroom required minimal remediation, some biological fluid, standard disinfection protocol. I was in and out in 3 hours. But I started noticing things during that 3rd visit. Small details that individually meant nothing but together formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. Every door in the house, all 12 of them, had scratches around the locks on the interior side. Faint, like someone had been scraping at them. The windows all had condensation between the panes, even though they appeared to be newer double-pane installations. And that smell had intensified. Definitely organic. Definitely wrong. I took photos of the door scratches this time. Told myself I was being thorough, documenting potential safety hazards. Really, I was starting to feel something I hadn't felt in years of this work, that specific unease you get when a situation doesn't add up. 3 deaths in one house in less than 2 months wasn't impossible. Unlikely, sure, but not impossible. An old man dies of natural causes, daughter is grief-stricken and disoriented and takes a fatal fall, then a buyer with an unknown heart condition has an attack. Tragic coincidence. Except I'd been in hundreds of death scenes, and I developed an instinct for places. Some locations feel neutral, just spaces where something bad happened. Others feel heavy, like the violence or suffering soaked into the walls. 2247 Rothwell Street felt active. That's the only word I have for it. The air inside seemed to move when it shouldn't, and every room felt like someone had just left it seconds before I entered. The 4th call came in mid-March. I saw the address on my work order and actually considered declining the job. But Lisa said the client had specifically requested me, and the pay was double rate for immediate response. A real estate agent had been found dead in the kitchen. Apparent suicide, she'd slit her wrists in the sink. The scene was extensive. blood on the counters, the floor, sprayed on the cabinet doors in patterns that indicated she'd moved around quite a bit before losing consciousness. When I arrived at 10 in the morning, there were still police outside. A detective I'd worked with before, Marcus Chin, was standing on the porch. He recognized me and shook his head as I approached. "Fourth death," he said. "Same house. We're starting to think there's something environmental. Gas leak, carbon monoxide, something." I asked if they'd tested, and he said the fire department had checked everything twice. All clear. He looked tired. "This whole situation is wrong," he told me. "For people in 3 months. That doesn't just happen." I agreed with him, but I didn't tell him what I was really thinking. I didn't tell him that when I'd driven up, I'd seen a face in the upstairs window. Just for a second, just a shape that could have been curtains or shadow. Except the house was empty, sealed as an active investigation scene until an hour ago. And the curtains in that window were pulled back, not positioned where a face would be. The kitchen took me 9 hours to properly clean. The agent, a woman named Tracy Holcomb, 38, had been thorough in her suicide. The medical examiner's preliminary report, which I shouldn't have had access to but did through my police contacts, noted hesitation marks on her left wrist but deep, committed cuts on her right. She'd bled out over an estimated 20 to 30 minutes, conscious for most of it. The blood pattern suggested she'd paced the kitchen, touched multiple surfaces, opened and closed the refrigerator door, which had a clear bloody handprint on the handle. What disturbed me more than the blood was what I found behind the refrigerator when I pulled it out to clean underneath. Scratches in the drywall. Deep ones, like someone had clawed at the wall with their fingernails. And written in what looked like dried blood, old enough to be brown and flaking, "Get out." I took 3 photos of that message before cleaning it away. I should have reported it. Should have called Detective Chin back in. Instead, I treated the wall with enzyme cleaner, sanded it smooth, and applied fresh paint from the supplies I'd started carrying in my van specifically for this house. I told myself I was preventing unnecessary panic. Really, I was already compromised. Already too curious. I needed to understand what was happening at 2247 Rothwell Street, and I knew that if I flagged it as a potential crime scene, I'd be cut out of the investigation entirely. So I documented everything privately. Took measurements of the rooms. They matched the public floor plan, nothing unusual. Tested the air quality with my own monitors, all normal readings. Checked for electrical issues, structural problems, foundation cracks. Nothing. The house was, by every objective measure, perfectly ordinary. Except people kept dying in it. I started researching the property history that night. Rothwell Street was developed in 1987, part of a residential expansion when the city annexed the surrounding farmland. 2247 was built in 1989, first owned by a couple named Richardson who lived there for 8 years before selling. Then a family named Torres for 6 years. Then a single woman for 4 years. Then Gerald Pritchard bought it in 2007 and lived there until his death in January of this year. No record of any deaths or incidents at the property before Gerald. No reports of hauntings, no local legends, no buried bodies or indigenous burial grounds or any of the dramatic backstory you'd expect. Just a normal house that had suddenly become very deadly. The 5th call came 3 days after I'd finished cleaning the kitchen. I saw the address on my phone and felt my stomach drop. I actually said out loud, in my empty apartment, "No. No fucking way." But I answered it, and Lisa's voice was strained when she asked if I was available for an immediate call out to Rothwell Street. Another death. The property inspector who'd been hired to assess potential environmental hazards had been found in the basement. I'd never been in the basement. It had been locked every previous visit. I packed my gear with hands that I noticed were shaking slightly, and I had to consciously steady them. 15 years of training told me this was just another job. Every survival instinct I had told me to refer the client to one of my competitors and block the address from future tickets. I drove to Rothwell Street anyway. Detective Chen was there again, along with 2 uniformed officers and someone from the city inspector's office. The inspector who died was named Paul Kwan, 54, found at the bottom of the basement stairs with his neck broken. Exactly like Caroline Marsh. Chen saw me and actually looked relieved. He asked if I was armed, which was a strange question. I told him I had a licensed carry permit and kept a Glock 19 in my van for rural jobs where wildlife was a concern. He suggested I bring it inside. That's when I knew something had fundamentally changed about this situation. Police don't tell civilians to arm themselves at death scenes unless they believe there's an active threat. I retrieved my weapon, checked the magazine, and holstered it on my belt. Chen took me aside before I entered and spoke quietly. "We found something down there," he said. "In the basement. I don't know what it is, and I'm not going to include it in my report until I understand it better. But you're going to see it when you clean, so I'm telling you now, don't touch it. Document it, work around it if you have to, but don't touch it." I asked what it was. He looked back at the house, then at me. "Just promise you'll call me immediately if anything unusual happens," he said. "And I mean anything. You feel dizzy, nauseous, confused, you get the hell out and call me. Understood?" I understood. I didn't like it, but I understood. The basement door was in the kitchen, the same door I'd noted as locked during previous visits. It opened to a wooden staircase, steep and narrow, descending into darkness. Someone had installed a modern LED shop light at the bottom, probably Paul Kwan before he died. I could see his outline marked in tape on the concrete floor, same position as Caroline at the bottom of the main stairs. The fall that killed him would have required him to tumble backward, head over heels, with enough force to break his neck on impact. I descended carefully, testing each step, one hand on the railing and one on my mag light. The basement was unfinished. Concrete floor, exposed floor joists above, foundation walls showing their age in small cracks and efflorescence. A newer furnace in one corner, water heater beside it, electrical panel on the far wall. Typical basement. Cold, slightly damp, smelling of concrete and that same organic rot I'd noticed upstairs. And in the center of the floor, directly beneath the main support beam, was what Detective Chen had warned me about. Someone had carved a perfect circle into the concrete. Not drawn, carved, like with a masonry bit or chisel. The circle was approximately 6 feet in diameter and 2 inches deep, the edges sharp and precise. Inside the circle were symbols I didn't recognize. Not letters, not numbers, just geometric shapes arranged in a pattern that made my eyes hurt if I looked at it too long. The concrete inside the circle was darker than the surrounding floor, stained with something that had soaked in deep. Paul Kwan's equipment was scattered near the circle. Air quality monitor, moisture meter, thermal camera. His clipboard had fallen face up, and I could see his handwriting on the top page. Circular carving in floor. Appears old but not on original inspection reports. Recommend further investigation. Temperature differential of 15 degrees within circle versus outside. No explanation for, and that's where his notes ended. I pulled out my own thermal camera and swept it across the circle. He was right. The concrete inside the circle was 15 degrees warmer than the surrounding floor. No visible heat source. No pipes underneath, no electrical lines, nothing that would explain it. Just a circle of concrete radiating heat like something alive was underneath it. I should have left then. I should have called Chin, told him this was beyond my scope, recommended they bring in specialists or demolition or whatever you call in when you find occult symbols carved into someone's basement floor. Instead, I set up my work lights around Paul Kwan's death site and began documenting the biological material. Professional autopilot. The task I was trained for, the job I could understand and control. The blood pattern told a story. Paul had been standing at the edge of the circle, facing the stairs, when he fell backward. No sign of a struggle, no defensive wounds according to the preliminary report. He'd simply fallen, as if pushed or pulled by something behind him. But there was nothing behind him except the circle and the concrete wall. I worked for 3 hours, photographing, collecting samples, and treating the affected areas. The entire time I was hyper-aware of the circle to my right, radiating its impossible heat. Twice I thought I heard something, a whisper, maybe, or the sound of fabric moving. Both times I stopped and listened, hand instinctively moving to my holstered weapon, but there was only the hum of the furnace and the drip of water from a condensation pipe. When I finally finished the remediation work, I did what I'd been planning since I first saw the circle. I approached it directly, standing where Paul Kwan had stood, and examined the symbols up close. They were definitely carved, not cast or poured. Someone had done this after the floor was finished, which meant either the original owner had done it, or someone had broken in specifically to create this. The depth and precision suggested power tools. Hours of work. Planning. I photographed every symbol, taking multiple angles, then measured the circle's exact dimensions and orientation. It was aligned perfectly north-south, which I verified with my phone's compass. The symbols repeated in a pattern every 45 degrees around the circumference. 8 repetitions. 8 points. The number felt significant, though I didn't know why. Then I made my mistake. I reached out and touched the concrete inside the circle. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming. The basement lurched sideways, or I couldn't tell which. My vision blurred and doubled, then snapped into focus sharper than normal. I could see every crack in the concrete, every grain of dust in the air. The smell of rot intensified into something choking and thick. And I heard, clear as if someone was standing directly behind me, a voice that said my name. Not my professional name. My full legal name that I haven't used since I was 18, that's not on any of my business documents or licenses. The name my mother gave me before she died. The voice pronounced it perfectly, with the correct emphasis, and followed it with a single instruction: stay. I jerked my hand back and stumbled away from the circle. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard it hurt. The basement looked normal again, no enhanced vision, no distortion. But the voice lingered in my head like an echo in a canyon, repeating, stay. Fit. I grabbed my equipment and took the stairs 2 at a time, suddenly desperate to be out of that basement. My shin caught the edge of a step halfway up and I felt skin tear, but I didn't slow down. I hit the kitchen at a near run and slammed the basement door behind me, then stood there breathing hard, both hands pressed flat against the door like I could hold something back by force of will. Detective Chen found me like that 5 minutes later. He took one look at my face and asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine, just startled myself, occupational hazard. He didn't believe me but didn't push. Instead he asked if I'd seen the circle. Said yes. He asked if I'd touched it. I lied and said no. He told me they were planning to seal the basement until they could bring in someone from the university to examine the symbols. Possibly archaeological, possibly gang-related, they weren't sure. In the meantime, the house was being condemned as a public safety hazard. No more showings, no more inspections, no more access until they understood what was happening. I asked if that meant no more cleaning calls, and he said yes, definitely. The city was taking control of the property. That should have been the end of it. I should have finished my paperwork, filed my report, sent my invoice, and never thought about 2247 Rothwell Street again. But two things prevented that. First, I couldn't stop thinking about the voice. It knew my name, my real name. That wasn't random, wasn't coincidence, wasn't auditory hallucination brought on by stress. Something in that house knew who I was. Second, I got the sixth call 4 days later. Lisa sounded confused when she gave me the details. She'd received the work order directly from the police department, specifically from Detective Chen, requesting me by name for immediate remediation at 2247 Rothwell Street. Another death. One of the officers who'd been stationed outside to prevent entry had been found dead inside the house, in the upstairs bedroom where Gerald Pritchard had originally died. No signs of forced entry. No explanation for how he'd gotten inside when the house was locked and sealed. Officer's name was David Cortez, 29 years old, a 6-year veteran. Cause of death was listed as asphyxiation. He'd been found face down on the floor with his hands clawed bloody, like he'd been trying to dig through the carpet. Like he'd been buried alive, except he was on top of the floor, not under it. I arrived at Rothwell Street to find the police presence had tripled. Crime scene tape across the lawn, 2 patrol cars blocking the street, and Detective Chen looking like he hadn't slept in days. He pulled me aside before I could enter and spoke in a low, urgent voice. "This has escalated beyond a hazard property," he said. "We're treating this as an active crime scene, potentially homicides. The department wants you to process the scene because you're already familiar with the location, but I need you to understand, this is no longer a standard remediation job. You see anything, hear anything, feel anything unusual, you radio immediately. I'll be right outside." He handed me a police radio set to their frequency and made me test it twice. Then he asked me, point blank, if I'd touched the circle in the basement. I looked at him and knew that if I lied again, if I kept this to myself, someone else was going to die. So I told him the truth. I told him about touching the circle, about the voice, about it knowing my name. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made my blood actually feel cold, not metaphorically but physically, like the temperature of my circulation dropped 10 degrees. "You're not the first person to tell me that," he said. "Every single person who died in that house mentioned hearing voices in the days before their death. We found diary entries from Caroline Marsh describing someone calling her name. Text messages from Tracy Holcomb to her sister saying she kept hearing her mother's voice, even though her mother's been dead for 12 years. Paul Kwan left a voice memo on his phone an hour before he died, and in it he's responding to someone we can't hear, someone he calls by his father's name." I asked the obvious question, "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I didn't want to influence your observations," he said. "I needed to know if you experienced the same phenomenon independently. And now I know you did. Which means whatever is happening in that house is real, it's consistent, and it's escalating. 6 deaths in 3 months. That's not environmental. That's not a coincidence. That's something actively killing people." He told me I could refuse the job, that he'd understand if I walked away. But they needed someone to clean the scene, and every other remediation company in the city had started declining work orders for this address. Word was getting around. The house at 2247 Rothwell Street was being mentioned on local forums, true crime podcasts, and paranormal investigation sites. It was developing a reputation, and people were afraid. I should have been afraid too. I was afraid. My hands were still shaking from the basement encounter 4 days ago. I'd barely slept, kept waking up to the memory of that voice saying stay. But I was also the only person who'd been inside that house 6 times and walked out alive. The only person who'd touched the circle and survived. Whatever was happening, I was somehow resistant to it, or it wanted something from me I hadn't given it yet. So I said yes. I took my equipment, my radio, and my weapon, and I entered 2247 Rothwell Street for the 6th time. The house felt different immediately. The air was thicker, harder to breathe, like the atmospheric pressure had increased. Every surface seemed to vibrate at a frequency just below hearing. The smell of rot was overwhelming now, not subtle at all, pouring from the vents and seeping from the walls. I radioed Chin and told him about the smell. He confirmed they couldn't smell anything from outside. Whatever it was, it only existed inside the house. I climbed the stairs to the bedroom where Gerald Pritchard had died, where I'd spent 5 hours in January cleaning decomposition fluids, where Officer David Cortez had just clawed himself bloody before suffocating on solid ground. The door was open. My work lights from previous jobs were still set up in the corner, unplugged but present. Someone had moved them. They'd been on the left side of the room before, now they were on the right. David Cortez had died in the center of the floor, in a space roughly 6 feet in diameter. The carpet around his body outline was shredded, torn through to the padding underneath. His fingernails had left grooves in the wood subfloor deep enough that I could see them from the doorway. The biological material was minimal, some blood from his hands, some fluid from his mouth and nose. But the scene itself was a scream made physical. Every inch of it radiated terror and desperation. I set up my equipment and began processing the scene, moving on autopilot while my conscious mind tried to understand what could make someone claw through carpet like they were being crushed. The medical examiner's preliminary report, which Chen had given me full access to now, indicated Cortez's lungs had been compressed as if under extreme pressure. Multiple rib fractures consistent with significant force applied to his chest. But no external injuries except the self-inflicted hand trauma. Nothing had touched him. He'd been crushed by invisible weight. I was photographing the carpet damage when I noticed the pattern. The shredded area formed a circle. Not perfect like the one in the basement, but close enough. 6 feet in diameter. The same size. And Officer Cortez had died in the exact center. I measured it to be sure. Perfect match. Then I measured the room itself and realized that if you dropped this circle through the floor, straight down through the house, it would align exactly with the circle in the basement. The same circle. The same space, just at a different vertical position. I pulled up the floor plan I'd saved on my phone and started checking other death locations. Caroline Marsh at the bottom of the stairs, I measured from the wall and calculated her position. Inside the circle's footprint. Tracy Holcomb in the kitchen, I verified my scene photos. Inside the circle. Paul Kwan in the basement, obviously inside the circle. The prospective buyer in the upstairs bathroom, I'd have to check, but I was already certain. Every death had occurred within the same 6-foot diameter cylinder of space running vertically through the entire house. A column of death running from basement to roof. And I was standing inside it. I stepped back quickly, my boots scraping on hardwood as I moved clear of the circle's boundary. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air pressure changed. Lighter. Easier to breathe. The smell faded slightly. I stepped back in, pressure returned, the smell intensified. Out again, relief. An oppression. The house wasn't just haunted or cursed. It was mapped. Precisely, geometrically mapped. Something was using that 6-foot circle as a hunting ground, and everything that entered it died. I radioed Chin and explained what I'd found. He was quiet for a moment, then asked if I could mark the boundaries clearly so they could establish it as a hard perimeter. I said yes, but I needed to finish processing Cortez's scene first, which meant working inside the circle. He asked if I felt safe doing that. I told him the truth, no. But the work needed to be done. I spent the next 4 hours carefully documenting and cleaning the bedroom, staying hyper-aware of every sensation, every sound, every shift in the air. Twice more I heard whispers at the edge of perception. Once I saw movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow that shouldn't exist given my light positioning. But nothing touched me. Nothing prevented me from working. It was like whatever inhabited that space was watching, waiting, curious about what I would do. By the time I finished, it was after 9 at night. I'd been in the house for 7 hours. I gathered my equipment and marked the circle's boundaries with red tape, creating a clear visual perimeter from the basement through the first floor and up to the bedroom. Chen came in with 2 other officers to verify my work, though I noticed none of them would step inside the marked area. Before I left, I asked Chen if I could see the basement one more time. Yes, why? I told him I needed to verify something about the symbols, which was partially true. Really, I needed to understand what I'd touched, what had spoken to me. He accompanied me down, weapon drawn, radioactive. The circle in the basement floor was warm when I approached it, the air above it shimmering slightly like heat rising from summer asphalt. The symbols seemed darker than before, their edges more defined. I photographed them again with better lighting and higher resolution, capturing every detail. Then I asked Chin if anyone had tried to translate or identify them. He told me they'd sent photos to 3 professors, one in archaeology, one in religious studies, one in linguistics. All 3 had responded with variations of the same message. These symbols don't match any known writing system, any historical occult tradition, or any linguistic pattern in their databases. They appear to be contemporary inventions, possibly created specifically for this location, which meant someone had designed this. Recently. Deliberately. I asked who owned the house before Gerald Pritchard. Chen checked his notes and said a woman named Dr. Sarah Kemper, a research psychologist who'd lived there from 2003 to 2007. She'd sold the property to Pritchard and moved out of state. They were trying to locate her now, but her last known address was disconnected and she had no active online presence. Dr. Sarah Kemper. I wrote the name in my phone and made a mental note to research her myself. If she'd created the circle, she would know what it was for. And if she'd moved away before any deaths occurred, she might not know what she'd done. Chen walked me out at 10:30 p.m. The neighborhood was quiet, porch lights on in distant houses, but no one visible. As I loaded my van, I looked back at 2247 Rothwell Street and saw that every window was dark except one. The upstairs bedroom. The room I'd just spent 7 hours in. A light was on, warm and yellow, clearly visible through the curtains. I told Chin. He saw it too. He radioed the officers inside, asking if anyone had turned on a light upstairs. Negative. All lights downstairs only, they confirmed. Chen drew his weapon and went back inside at a run. I waited by my van, watching the window. The light stayed on for 30 seconds, 45, a full minute. Then it went dark. Chen emerged 5 minutes later and shook his head. No lights on anywhere, he said. All the switches are down, all the bulbs are cold. Whatever we saw, it wasn't electricity. I drove home that night with my radio turned up loud to cover the silence, but I could still hear it in the gaps between songs. My name, whispered in a voice that sounded like my mother, like my sister, like my own voice echoing back at me. Fit, fit, fit. The seventh call came the next morning. I was in my apartment, drinking coffee I couldn't taste and researching Dr. Sarah Kemper on my laptop, when Lisa called. Her voice was shaking. She told me she'd just received a work order for 2247 Rothwell Street, requested immediately, and she didn't know what to do. I asked who had died, and she said that was the problem. No one had died. The work order was filed by the property management company requesting a final deep clean before permanent closure. But the property management company had dissolved their contract 2 weeks ago. They weren't managing the property anymore. The city was. I asked who'd actually submitted the order. She said it had come through the online request system, paid in full via credit card, with my name specifically listed as the required technician. The card was registered to the property address itself, 2247 Rothwell Street. That wasn't possible. The house couldn't request a cleaning. The house couldn't pay for services. But I checked my work order system and there it was. New job, same address, full payment confirmed. And in the special instructions field, a single sentence. Final remediation required. All rooms, basement to attic. Come alone. I called Detective Chin. He verified that no official work orders had been issued for the property and that I should absolutely not respond to the request. The house was still an active crime scene, still sealed, still under investigation. He said he'd send a unit to verify the property was secure and that I should delete the work order and block the address. But I was already putting on my boots, already loading my van, because I understood now what was happening. The house, or whatever was in the house, had been calling me back. 7 times in 3 months. Not random victims. Not coincidental deaths. It had been building to this. Every job had pulled me deeper, shown me more, prepared me for something. And now it was ready. I drove to Rothwell Street at 11 in the morning on a gray April day with rain threatening in the distance. The police tape was still up, but no officers were visible. Chen had probably pulled them back to regroup, or maybe they'd never been there at all. Maybe everything I'd been told was part of the pattern. I didn't know anymore. I didn't care. I was going inside. The front door was unlocked. Not broken, not forced. Just unlocked. The deadbolt turned from the inside. I entered with my full gear, respirator, Tyvek suit, gloves, boots. And my weapon, loaded and holstered on my right hip where I could reach it quickly. The house was completely silent. No hum of appliances, no creak of settling wood. Silent like a held breath. I cleared the first floor systematically, checking every room. Empty. Undisturbed. The red tape I'd used to mark the circle's boundaries was gone, removed completely with no residue. I climbed to the second floor. Also empty. The bedroom where Officer Cortez had died looked pristine, like it had never been touched. The carpet was intact, no shredding, no damage. Impossible. I'd personally removed sections of that carpet less than 24 hours ago. The bathroom where the buyer had died. Also pristine. The kitchen where Tracy Holcomb had bled out. Spotless. Every trace of my work, every repair I'd made, every surface I'd treated, all of it erased or restored. The house looked exactly as it must have looked when Dr. Sarah Kemper lived here. Organized. Waiting. I stood in the kitchen and spoke out loud. I asked what it wanted. No response. I asked why it had called me here. Silence. Then I asked the question that had been forming in my mind since I touched the circle. "Are you Sarah Kemper?" The basement door swung open. Not violently, not dramatically. Just a smooth, quiet swing as if someone had gently pushed it. An invitation. I approached and looked down the stairs into absolute darkness. My flashlight beam didn't penetrate it. The light just stopped at the darkness like hitting a physical barrier. I descended anyway. One step at a time, my left hand on the rail and my right on my holstered weapon. The darkness receded as I entered it, revealing the basement exactly as I'd seen it before. Concrete floor. Support beam. And in the center, the circle, glowing now with a faint luminescence that came from the symbols themselves. Standing next to the circle was a woman. She was in her 60s, thin, with gray hair pulled back in a bun. Professional clothes, slacks, and a cardigan. She looked completely solid, completely real, completely alive. She turned to face me as I reached the bottom step and smiled. It wasn't a threatening smile. It was sad. Exhausted. She said my name. My real name. And then she said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know it would keep working after I left. I thought if I wasn't here to maintain it, it would just stop." I asked what she meant, asked who she was. But I already knew. Dr. Sarah Kemper. The psychologist who'd lived here, who'd carved the circle, who'd created whatever this was. She told me she'd been researching grief response in controlled environments, testing whether a physical location could retain and amplify emotional trauma. She'd lost her daughter, Emily, in this house, a genuine accident, a fall down the basement stairs in 2006. After that, she'd become obsessed with the idea that places could hold on to death, could remember it. She designed an experiment, created the circle using principles from psychogeography, sacred geometry, and her own theoretical framework. The symbols were meant to anchor consciousness to a specific location, to trap the last moments of awareness and replay them. It was supposed to be contained, she said. Controlled. I was going to study it, document it, and prove that localized consciousness persistence was possible. But Emily's death, it activated something. The circle started drawing in other deaths, amplifying them. I couldn't stop it. Every time I tried to break the pattern, it got stronger. So I left. I thought distance would weaken the connection. I thought it would eventually dissipate. I asked why she was here now. She looked down at the circle and then back at me. "I'm not here," she said. "I died 3 months ago. Heart attack in my apartment in Seattle. But when I died, I came here, to the circle, because I'd bound myself to it when I created it. And now I'm trapped with all the others. Gerald, Caroline, Tracy, Paul, David. We're all here. All of us inside this space, replaying our deaths over and over." The temperature in the basement dropped suddenly. My breath came out in visible clouds. Around the circle, shadows began to materialize. Vague human shapes at first, then clearer. I recognized Gerald Pritchard from his photos, Caroline Marsh, Tracy Holcomb, Paul Kwan, Officer David Cortez. All of them standing around the circle's perimeter, looking at me with expressions of desperate hope. Dr. Kemper said, "You're the only person who's touched the circle and survived. The only one who's been here 7 times and walked away. That means you're resonant with it. Compatible. And that means you can break it." I asked how. She pointed to the center of the circle. "The symbols create a closed loop," she explained. "A self-sustaining pattern that feeds on death energy and emotional trauma. But every pattern has a key, a specific disruption point that collapses the entire structure. For this circle, it's right there, the center point. If someone living stands in that exact spot and consciously rejects the pattern, refuses to die, refuses to feed it, the loop breaks. I looked at the center of the circle, the warmest spot, the exact location where everyone had died. And I understood. She was asking me to become the 8th victim. To stand where they'd stood, experience what they'd experienced, and somehow survive it through sheer force of will. I told her no. I told her this wasn't my responsibility, wasn't my experiment, wasn't my fault. I started backing toward the stairs. All 6 figures stepped forward simultaneously, blocking my path. Not threatening, pleading. Dr. Kemper said, "If you leave, it will continue. It will call others. 7 deaths in 3 months. How many more in the next 3? Next year? We didn't choose this. We're victims. But you can choose. You can end it." I asked what would happen to them if I succeeded. She said they would be released, finally able to move on, free. I asked what would happen to me. She said honestly she didn't know. Either I'd survive and break the pattern, or I'd die and join them, and the cycle would continue until someone stronger came along. I stood there in that basement, surrounded by ghosts, staring at a glowing circle that had killed 6 people and trapped their consciousness in an endless loop of death. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to run, to get out, call Chen, let the authorities handle it. But I knew they couldn't. I've been here 7 times. I'd seen what conventional responses achieved, nothing. The house would keep killing until someone did what Dr. Kemper asked. So I made my choice. I stepped forward, past the ghosts, and walked to the edge of the circle. The heat radiating from it was intense now, physically painful. The symbols were burning bright enough to hurt my eyes. I could hear whispers, screams, my mother's voice, my sister's voice, my own voice begging me not to do this. I stepped into the circle. The sensation was instantaneous and total. Every nerve in my body fired at once. I felt crushing pressure on my chest like Officer Cortis. I felt like Caroline and Paul. Felt the despair that had driven Tracy to cut her wrists. Felt the slow suffocation of Gerald dying in his bed. Felt the sudden terror of a heart attack like the buyer. Felt the research obsession that had driven Sarah Kemper to create this nightmare. All of it at once. Overlapping. Overwhelming. My body was shutting down. I could feel it. Heart arrhythmic. Lungs collapsing. Vision darkening. This was death. Multiple deaths. Simultaneous deaths. I was experiencing what the circle had recorded, what it was designed to trap and replay forever. But I was also still standing. Still conscious. Still me. I focused on that. On my name. My real name. My identity. I had a daughter. A sister. An EMT. A crime scene cleaner. I had lived through losses and trauma and loneliness. I had chosen this career because I could handle death. Because I could see it clearly and not be destroyed by it. I opened my mouth and said out loud, through the crushing pressure and the overlapping screams, "I refuse to die here. I reject this pattern. You cannot have me." The pressure increased. It felt like being at the bottom of the ocean. My ribs creaked. Blood ran from my nose. I fell to my knees on the concrete, but I kept talking. Kept refusing. Kept asserting my existence against the death loop trying to consume me. I am not your food. I am not your victim. I am not your experiment. I am alive and I choose to remain alive, and you have no power over that choice. The symbols flared white-hot. The whispers became screams. The basement shook, or maybe it was me shaking, I couldn't tell. Every shadow in the room converged on the circle, pressing down, trying to force me to surrender. To give in. To die and join the pattern. Instead, I stood up. It took everything I had. Every ounce of strength, every reserve of will, every stubborn refusal to quit that had kept me going through 6 years of cleaning up humanity's worst moments. I stood up in the center of that circle and I screamed back at it. No. The light went out. All of it. The symbols, the pressure, the whispers, everything cut off like a thrown switch. I was alone in darkness, standing on cold concrete, breathing hard but breathing. Alive. I turned on my flashlight. The circle was gone. Not just dark, gone. The concrete was smooth and unmarked, like it had never been carved at all. The basement was empty. No Dr. Kemper. No ghosts. Just old concrete and a furnace and the normal sounds of a house settling. I climbed the stairs on shaking legs and found the main floor flooded with sunlight. The smell was gone. The oppressive atmosphere was gone. It felt like a normal house. Empty and waiting for new owners. I walked out the front door at 12:47 p.m. according to my phone. I'd been inside for less than 2 hours. It felt like days. Detective Chen was pulling up in his unmarked car as I reached my van. He asked if I'd been inside, and I told him the truth. Told him everything. The work order, the basement, Dr. Kemper's ghost, the circle, all of it. He listened to my entire story without interrupting, then made a call. Send a team inside to verify. They came out 20 minutes later and confirmed. Basement floor unmarked, no signs of symbols or carving, no temperature anomalies, no evidence of paranormal activity. The house was clean. Chen asked me how I was feeling. I told him I was fine. Tired but fine. He suggested I get checked out at a hospital anyway, given the nosebleed and what I'd described. I agreed. They found bruising on my ribs and elevated blood pressure, but nothing requiring intervention. Stress-related, the doctor said. Consistent with a panic attack or extreme anxiety episode. The official report filed that week listed 2247 Rothwell Street as the site of 6 deaths over a 3-month period due to undetermined environmental factors that had since been resolved. Property was cleared for sale. The house was sold 4 weeks later to a young couple from out of state. They've lived there for 8 months now. No incidents. No deaths. No calls for remediation. I quit crime scene cleaning in June. I told everyone I was burned out, needed a change, and wanted to try something new. My sister asked why I wouldn't go into buildings with circular floor plans anymore. I told her I'd developed a superstition about curved architecture. I let her believe that. Because the truth, the real reason I can't enter circular spaces anymore, is that I still hear the whispers sometimes. In quiet moments, in the space between sleep and waking, I hear the voices of Gerald and Caroline and Tracy and Paul and David and Sarah. They're not trapped anymore. They're not suffering. But they're not entirely gone either. And if I'm right about what the circle actually did, if I'm right about consciousness persistence and locational anchoring and the theory that Dr. Kemper proved with her terrible experiment, then death isn't an ending. It's just a different kind of room. And some rooms are harder to leave than others.